So here's the Jefferson quote that has to do with health and the government. If people let the government decide which foods they eat and medicines they take, their bodies will soon be in as sorry a state as are the souls of those who live under tyranny. Thomas Jefferson, and I think that's pretty appropriate. Let's not look to the government as the final authority for our health.
Why have many of these studies intentionally overdosed patients at toxic levels of hydroxychloroquine? The recommended, that's why I gave you the first one, I gave you the answer to go along with it. The recommended dose for treatment for this illness, 400 milligrams on day 1, and then 200 milligrams a day for 4 days. That's it. It's a very small amount of the drug. The most recent one that came out used 400 milligrams twice a day. That's 800 milligrams a day. That's 4 times the recommended dose. Some of the studies have used up to 2,400 milligrams a day of this medication. There is no doctor anywhere that wouldn't tell you that those types of dosages are potentially toxic and potentially life-threatening. Why have these studies that have had negative outcomes all involved overdosing our patients? Why? Just why?
True, some people who were given hydroxychloroquine did die, but they were given doses known to be too high. So where is the truth hiding? Who might benefit from hiding the truth? Welcome to Poli-Psych Podcast. In today's episode, we are discussing COVID, hydroxychloroquine, and some of the players that have recently come onto the main stage of that discussion, and some of the players who have been removed from the stage of that discussion. Ken, would you begin our discussion today by introducing us, reminding us of what has happened so far in this struggle with this novel coronavirus?
Hello, Cindy. Hi, Don. We all, I think, will look back on this as an unfolding rather than a specific point source event. And we started to see the stories come through Zero Hedge back in January, and I think we discounted some of them. I think Dr. Fauci even discounted many of them. So the story unrolled with a lot of, just a haze of questions that were slowly resolved. I think the matter came to a head with the pandemic declaration that occurred on March 11th. But there was a prehistory. It's interesting, and it became evident later, and I'm sure there were others that were working on this before that time. But one of the more interesting is an individual named Jack Spirko, who runs a pretty popular podcast on resiliency, which is sort of a watered down version of survivalism. And it's a great philosophy, really. It doesn't have the gloom and doom aspect, but it's just more about practical ways of dealing with achieving more freedom in your personal life, and having access to some of the things that we depend on from the grocery store. Learning to grow food and living a more natural lifestyle. But he had also been deployed in the military in South America and was already familiar with the generic precursor chloroquine, which has been around for a long time. And I will assume that most people are familiar with the background on chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine. It's an interesting word to spell, but I think most of us can spell it correctly. Incidentally, Twitter very commonly introduces misspellings in their drop-downs that are fascinating. There are about 6 different versions of the word that they'll give you a choice to sift through. But in any event, the hive mind of the internet really helped, I think, in the initial stages. And in that process, Jack Spirko described in one of his podcasts, and we'll play a clip.
We've known about this from the Australians since 30 days ago. We've known about this. There's all kinds of regulations with production and things like that. It's part of the delay here. And I expected, oh, gee, we found this. Let's start using it and saving people's lives with it. It's not that simple. This medication, Cosequine, And if they ask you to take it at some point, don't be afraid of it. I took it multiple times on tropical deployments to prevent malaria. Not only does it have a cure rate in this peer-reviewed study of 50 out of 50. Let me say that again. They took 50 patients, they gave them this medication, they got rapid cure and total destruction of the virus in 50 out of 50. It's almost unheard of in a medication against a virus. And it also protects the lungs. And one of the things that you need to understand to get what's going on here is this is almost two different things. And that's why they tried the HIV drugs, because in some ways, the HIV virus causing AIDS is a lot like the Corona SARS-2 virus causing COVID-19.
The process of petitioning the White House and his work with somebody in Australia when this first started to emerge, the what we now call the COVID-19, and not. I think the word cure, we'll be addressing that in the show as we unroll this whole thing, but there are many times that when we'll look at a word or a framing of an individual situation and how the linguistic content really affects the meaning of the rest of the sentence. And I think that this will come up quite a bit with this issue, and we'll notice it quite a bit with Dr. Fauci's interpretations. The way he'll frame a sentence, and will reveal more about the medical treatment paradigm behind the story. And we'll be looking at this more from I'd say from a personality angle, the people that have come into the story, and also the deeper theme behind the story. And Don, give us a little insight into what you think is really happening here as it pertains to the election and some of the other things that we're seeing in the big picture.
Well, yeah, thanks, Ken. And I'm going to push the timeline back just a tiny bit, and that is to remind people that there was this thing called Event 201 or 201, a global pandemic exercise hosted by Bill and Melinda Gates. Just a coincidence that happened in the fall of October 2019. So that is what my first element here in the stage setting. And I do look at this whole thing as being events that are playing out on a stage. Now, so when we say an event is staged, to me that doesn't mean that it's artificial. That just means that it's been, its entry was known to be something that was going to come online, so to speak. There were forces that and powers behind the scenes, powerful people like Bill and Melinda Gates, that had this exercise planned. And then that is going to obviously factor into the year that is going to occur between then and the elections. So that's a staged event, not a predetermined event, but this stage has been set. So we have all these players, and then hydroxychloroquine was another player that entered the game that we can tell from the immediate reaction of the powers that be. Oh no, that's not something that we want on the stage. We want to remove that from the stage as soon as possible. Well, why? What was the original purpose of having set up this stage? What was the goal? What were the authors of this drama trying to accomplish by setting the stage in the way they did? And I strongly believe that it's all about the election in 2020 and making mail-in ballots a strong possibility. That's still in play. President Trump is coming out hard against that, saying that that would be serious corruption, seriously make for a seriously corrupt election. I'm finding amazingly leftists that are countering that argument or thinking that they're countering that argument by saying, oh, no, that leaves a paper trail, and it's the Republicans that are going to be cheating because they own the voting machines. Well, we've got dueling narratives here, and it's coming down to which narrative actually gets the attention of the public. And what I'm seeing is a lot of pushbacks in the comment sections of articles that are coming out that are pushing the narrative that hydroxychloroquine is quackery, or it's not real science, or it's been debunked, or all that kind of thing. There seems to be a great deal of awareness that if you catch these kind of flu-like illnesses early enough, that there are some very strong health benefits from hydroxychloroquine. So there is this drama that's playing out in real time, and I don't think the results are predetermined, even though I do believe they've been staged.
Well, as most people are aware, there is really no such thing as a cure for a virus. People have used vaccines for viruses to prevent viruses. Sometimes they're effective, sometimes not so effective. And there are cures for bacterial infections. Now, cures is a very broad word, but antibiotics very effectively treat and aid in healing of strep throat, for instance. That's something that virtually all of us have experienced. You have strep throat and you take penicillin and you don't have strep throat anymore. That's a bacteria again. This is a virus that we're addressing, and there is not a known cure for a virus.
Viruses are not even actually living things, correct?
Right, they're just pieces of genetic material. And I think that coronaviruses are RNA viruses as opposed to DNA viruses, which I am not the one to explain the difference to anybody there. But I know that that is a significant difference. But just to reinforce that, to look for a cure for a virus is something that has not really been done. However, malaria is a virus, and malaria has been very effectively treated through the use of quinine, chloroquine, and hydroxychloroquine, depending on what period of history we're talking about. There's been kind of an evolution of this drug. And Ken, would you like to talk a little bit about bacteria and antibiotics, and it was almost by accident that people discovered antibiotics, wasn't it?
Yeah, it came out in one of my my grandfather fought in World War I, and at one point they started to develop infections, and if they noticed a soldier that was debilitated and had swelling or just trench foot, I think they would call it. So what they would do, and they had no idea why this worked, and he wrote about it in his still unpublished memoir of that time. They would take the soldiers to a Trappist monastery in Belgium, and they would tell them the good news was that they could eat as much as they wanted, and the bad news was it was all moldy fruit. And they had no idea why this worked, but if the soldiers went there for about 2 or 3 days and ate nothing but the moldy fruit, they would come back out and the problem would have resolved. And that was penicillin. That was isolated later. Semmelweis, I think, or somebody, they eventually figured out what this was when they put it in a petri dish. So that was alluded to in the memoir, so I haven't actually gone through to see. Maybe other places had done the same thing, and that sometimes does happen in history, where you'll have multiple eruptions of a cure or a resolution to something. But getting back to the word cure, I don't know if there is a cure for anything in the conventional sense. There's usually a very specific strategy of cellular defense of one sort or another, and whether it involves RNA or DNA, this is what the virologists would do, and they are fairly competent at figuring out what's under the hood. It's just the problem comes in when we bring in the profit motive. And I think that profit motive was thwarted by the presence of this discovery that hydroxychloroquine, in combination with zinc and other things in the early stages or as a preventative. And again, this everybody's been over this, at least people in alternative media know that it's a preventative and early stage. Yet we'll find Dr. Fauci constantly pointing to a study that where the treatment, maybe hydroxychloroquine by itself, was administered in doses that would classify as overdoses, really, especially for people whose bodies are already compromised by pre-existing conditions or whatever. So, man, I don't want to call it murder, but it's not good. I don't think it's what they did was particularly ethical. I guess we'd have to see more of the details about it. But to refer to studies where this treatment, this is what we have to call it, as a treatment. It's not a cure. I mean, there is no cure really for anything.
Are you saying, Ken, let me make sure I'm hearing you right, that people might be motivated to actually end human lives because they value money?
I don't know if they do it, honestly, I don't know if they do it consciously. I think that may be regarded as collateral damage, or maybe they just push it out of their minds completely and just plow ahead and just soldier on. And we're all familiar with the psychological studies of how that can work in a group.
Yeah, I have to ask you because this is a psychology show, so we got to cover the psychological aspect. What's going on behind these people's minds?
Well, we're one of the psychology 101 with the administering of the shock. They had that one test where it was all staged, but where people would just become, if they had the proper social reinforcement, you would just sort of fall into line with whatever's going on. And I think the medical community, what we call the established pharmaceutical community, has very high level of social cohesion. And they just kind of go along with the company line, and that's kind of what's happening here, I think, with this whole thing.
Well, wait a minute. The other thing I've got to ask you is, wait, so you're making capitalism the villain, but isn't Donald Trump the arch capitalist, the very embodiment of capitalism? So what's going on here?
Well, I think the pharmaceutical industry is functioning as a social organism, and it's actually defending against an invasion by, call it a virus of, a simpler cure that sort of circumvents the need for high-end pharmaceuticals. The remdesivir doses are, I think, $1,000 a pop or something, and even some of the therapeutics that they're talking about, injections, RNA, essentially reprogramming the RNA system. That's kind of scary stuff. So, I'm going to listen a little more to the hydroxy and at least try to see if there's a debate that can come out. I think Jack Spirko addressed this very well in his, he released another video last night. This is, again, going back to the person that I was tracking in the initial stages, who had the hydroxy and introduced it. But with that in mind, Cindy, to get back to what you had said, I think every organism on Earth, plant, animal, fish, bird, whatever, it's even a single cell organism needs to defend against or basically interact with its environment in a way that will be life-giving, as opposed to the possible parasitism or destruction of that organism. It's an instinctive process that's been perfected over millions of years, really. And it doesn't just we're not just looking at mammals, or we're looking at everything, every single thing on Earth. It has this ability to differentiate and live essentially in its own biome, so to speak. So we can't really cure these things as much as come up with a strategy to either adjust to it or circumvent the activity of these invasive pathogens, whether they're viruses or the single strand of viron. Last thing on this topic is, I believe that the human body has a natural ability to interact with small samples of virons very small doses of exposure to things is part of the natural order. And, we talk about masks and face shields. Next time you cut up an onion, you can feel, and I don't know what the micron size is of an onion, aroma, but you're cutting the onion. It's about 2 feet away, and your eyes will tear up. And I'm beginning to wonder if the atmosphere itself, with all the virons floating around, that we have a natural ability to absorb small samples of all these things for a reason. And that reason is to fine tune our ability to move around the world. But our world is smaller. This is one of the problems with mobility. When you're bringing people in from other countries, cars, just all the different things that we're exposed to that we didn't evolve with over time. Complex issues, but again, one injection or one medication isn't going to solve the problem. I think it's a multifaceted problem that has been limited by political bias, and also this underlying political strategy of, I think, postponing or somehow otherwise altering the organic outcome of the election. And I think that template has been pasted on over the top. It's an overlay that has destroyed the ability for people to debate this issue objectively.
I'm not certain that it's an overlay. Considering Event 201, and if there is a dark conspiracy to rule the world, all of these that would explain all of these puzzle pieces, unfortunately. But I don't think that we want to really focus on that. But I think some things that we do want to mention is the emotional impact that this has had on people. Anybody who's been out there in social media, I myself have had family members who I would swear are paid trolls. Some of the crazy things that they're saying, because I avoid direct arguments. That doesn't help anybody. But it's nice to just put little tidbits out there, little breadcrumbs to help people maybe find their own way. But the emotional response is so strong that it's obvious that there's been a deep, deep fear response that's been triggered in people. And I suppose we can consider that in the context of survival. Are people really that afraid of COVID-19 that they actually accuse people of being murderers for not wearing a mask? There's such an irrational thought process here. The only thing that explains it is extremely strong emotions. And I believe, and you probably both have some comments about how that fear can be, the force of that fear can be wielded as a weapon against Donald Trump, or maybe the tide will turn and that fear will be wielded as a weapon against Dr. Fauci when people begin to learn some of what his approach has meant and been inspired by. But I really want to, because we talk about a lot about feelers in our shows, how this is all about feelings. Everything that's happening with COVID, whether it's safe to have the election, whether hydroxychloroquine is safe or dangerous, whether we get vaccinated. There's the motives here, and I want to say under the surface, but they're very close to the surface, are just raw, screaming fear.
Definitely, Cindy. I can't help but think of the famous quote that's attributed to, many people, but Benjamin Franklin is one, that the government that promises you safety will soon be able to, you won't be able to have both the liberty and the safety. You can't have both. And this people that are sensitive to tyranny can see this in process, but people that are not just don't. There are some really good quotes. I was looking for one as you were talking, but I haven't found it yet about that. Basically, Thomas Jefferson warned us about what the having a government act like a doctor would be like, and it removes the basis of your humanity. It's actually a scary thing, and there is something, I think, in all human beings that wants to turn over its free will in order to assure that it can survive. And often often, maybe always, those promises are not based in reality. And this this whole battle that we're in a scientific sense is very much that way. I can't help but look at the context of the original, the basically recognized as the father of modern germ theory is Louis Pasteur, and he's the one that pasteurization comes from, is named for him. And that's how you keep your milk safe. Well, raw milk is not pasteurized, it hasn't been cooked, and therefore you have these organisms that can become a problem in the milk before it's pasteurized. So that's the context in which the people think of germs as being so important to eliminate and that they're so dangerous. Well, here's a quote from Louis Pasteur on his deathbed or close to it. And there was this debate at the time between which was more important, the microbe or the germ, or the organism or the terrain in which the germ or microbe grew. And Louis Pasteur actually said, Bernard was right. The germ is nothing. The terrain is everything. So really, your body, what he's saying is your body has the ability to defend itself. You just have to give it what it needs. And that's the situation that we're in. We have to admit that people's understanding of what a cure is very warped by this desire of people posing as the safeguards of your very being. Government is trying to keep you safe. The truth is it never can, but the government does owe it to the people to do its best. So there's a lot of posers in this game, and those posers want to tell you that they can keep your body safe, and there's an invisible enemy that they want to keep you safe from. Well, it doesn't take much to see that there's a lot of room for some pretty manipulative practices there. So I'm not going to define that. I'm going to let you sort through all the information out there on your own. But this is a pretty clouded landscape here where we have people with agendas behind the scenes, and what you see is not really what's there. It's by and large what they want you to see. So beware of appeals to authority, because authority may not have your best interest in mind.
I think we'd have to look at the scale of medical treatment as well. I think one of the dominant trends in modern times is to increase the scale of production. It does work in some industries, and you can't build a car in your living room, and you can't there's a lot of things where you need that large scale. But medical treatment, different story. We're looking at that as a one-on-one doctor-patient relationship. But here we have big pharma coming in with their profit model that's, we'll face Dunbar's number. We'll get past the 150 people cognitive ability for people to actually empathize. And what we have are, the big pharma dealing with mass population health issues, the other end of the spectrum. And that may be one of the themes underlying this, but I'm going to quickly zip through some of the names that have sort of taken the stage here, and it's a fascinating array of people. Some we actually do know personally. Dr. Jerome Corsi became involved in this, and I think part of the reason is right away the political significance was recognized when this first emerged. Those who have studied the activities of the Gates and some of the other people involved even Soros had alluded to, George Soros had alluded to a economic catastrophe. So this story always had a potentially dominant sub-theme of political intrigue with it. I don't know if the general public grasps that yet, but perhaps they are now that the cities are burning and we've got this zinc issue right now. But so Dr. Corsi, we also met Judy Mikovits. I don't think most of us knew who she was. Some of us did, maybe I didn't. And her work, Plandemic, and that was definitely censored. And usually when that occurs, you know that they're onto something, at least partially, if not fully, grasping what the deeper theme was. And Dr. Zelenko, also very influential fundamentalist. The sect of Judaism, I think it's Hasidism or one of those, but he's very adamant about his belief in the treatment, and as a physician, he's dealing with patients every day, and that's the level. I think we should look at it from that angle and give the physicians the freedom to do what they do and to fulfill their oath. They have the Hippocratic Oath, which is another version of the oath that we have in the military and government, and it's an ethical issue at that point. And I think to limit that freedom that's a real problem, is when we're facing that as kind of a side topic, but it's a dominant topic for this issue. You can see that the media has constantly been pushing back, but there was a new outbreak of censorship after what we now call the White Coat Summit, and I think they self-defined it as that. And we always laugh. I think when we see this happen, they usually will attack the personalities, and I do read some of the troll comments just to kind of look at the linguistic content. And it's funny how they were saying, well, look, they all have the white coats on, and what else are they going to wear? Jeans and a t-shirt. So I thought that was pretty well done. Their website was taken down immediately. It was kind of a footprint website. It was the vulnerability was pointed out pretty early on. So that's been swept away. I think they aren't going away, and I think the central character there is Dr. Simone Gold, who is the latest personality to emerge, and in consciousness. And I think she will persist. I don't think these people are going to fold up and just go away. They're not sheep. They are very dedicated to their profession, and of course we have the iconic scene of Dr. Stella Immanuel on the steps of the Supreme Court, and I think we'll, in honor of her very brave, outspoken, we'll play that. We're going to play a clip now.
I'm here because I have personally treated over 350 patients with COVID. Patients that have diabetes, patients that have high blood pressure, patients that have asthma, old people. I think my oldest patient is 92, 87-year-olds. And the result has been the same. I put them on hydroxychloroquine, I put them on zinc, I put them on Zitromax, and they are all well.
So that was a very dramatic presentation. I think it was very heavily censored, and for a reason, I think partially due to realizing that we have, the reverse racism issue going on and some other things that are attempting to frame the issue in terms of that political context, and to have essentially a crossover of convoluted their attempt to frame and own the issue of this race division they're trying to promote. So it's great to see a race just become irrelevant, and to have to be able to just evaluate someone's dedication to an issue without bringing race into it at all. It just doesn't. It's not appropriate. And I think that's why they were trying to censor this very effective bridge that was created by just this very dedicated physician who's treating patients, expressing herself so eloquently.
Well, if, as I tend to believe, Event 201 was a planning session for how to get some of the results some of the social controllers wanted from the virus. I think one thing that they failed to take into consideration, because it's obvious that they this summer they want people to feel divided and suspicious of one another. But one thing they may have failed to take into consideration with using this virus as a tool is that it does give us all something in common. And they've wanted to play the something in common as earlier Roku and some of the other online services would have special viewings for people because we weren't supposed to leave our homes, and they tried to build the commonality around being forced to stay home and of course being afraid. But what they also did was give us a common problem, and Americans are, and actually all people, are fairly well known for pulling together when presented with a common problem. And I think that is what Dr. Immanuel represents, is that she's not just saying, hey, black people, hydroxychloroquine works. She said that she effectively said that she was willing to lay down her life for her patients, black and white. Race, as one of you mentioned, race is not in this picture. It's people with a common problem. And so I think, all the social controllers have all kinds of ways that they can predict human behavior. But there seems to be a missing element there that they can't predict. I kind of want to say that is the love of God. Maybe we call it the survival instinct, that we're not, and I would like to think that we're not as selfish as the social controllers believe that we are when they formulate these traps for us, that we actually have more compassion and are willing to lay aside our differences to help one another.
Absolutely, Cindy. And I really think that one of the dynamics that's in play here is having enough people come to that point where they break through the almost sleepwalking into the trust of government, the trust of the experts, into saying, wait a minute, this doesn't add up. This doesn't make sense. I'm taking back my decision-making process that I was tricked into giving away. And they might even not say in the beginning, might not say tricked, but it's obvious that politicians often pose as the saviors in order to become the master. Famous quote I've used here before. And when people see that in operation, their lives change and humanity changes, because that waking up process, it has happened throughout history. There have been great awakenings. They've not always been as politically charged as this one is. But there's always been a survival element where people have said, wait a minute, I'm a special, I'm like Howard Beale says in Network, I'm a human being, damn it, or words to that effect. And people take back what they've given away, and that is happening now, and that's a very, very powerful thing, where you take back control of your own life, and you realize, wait a minute, why did I give that away? I trusted these people that don't really know what they say they know, and it's because there's been some leaks in their control system of those that do want to pose as the masters. We've been able to learn things that they didn't want us to know, and hydroxychloroquine, I'm convinced, is one of those things. It's not a miracle cure because miracle cures don't exist. There are things that help your body, and I believe that's one of them.
Just want to look at another element that came up, and many developments. Here we are on the 30th of July, and the story is evolving in front of our eyes. The rally in Kodak stock was an interesting story that came up 2 days ago. And the stock itself, based in Rochester, New York, was a photographic company. I think most people are familiar with it, especially baby boomers and that range, and even beyond. They were still producing high quality 35 millimeter film until fairly recently, but the company had kind of petered out. I would classify them as a photochemical company. Film in their regard was really a chemical process for the most part. But all of a sudden, the stock went from, it was sort of in the basement at around $3, but it shot up to $8.50 on, I think it was on Tuesday. And now it's gone all the way up to, it's sort of flatlined out at around 35, and it in very, very volatile trading. And that's a over 1,000% increase from baseline of $3 up to 35. But the point is that they were mentioned as receiving a Defense Authorization Act loan to produce a precursor, if not assemble the finished product of hydroxychloroquine, which is one component of this treatment, referred to as a therapeutic. But again, we're in the word salad, so I don't even like putting words on these things anymore. Just that it's, that I'll just go back to the paradigm that the primary care physician is there are a group of them, America's frontline doctors, who feel that this is ineffective treatment. And I think they're demanding their rights, their right to select that. So anyway, Kodak stock, the reason I'm pointing to this is that investors they're a different breed of cat. I think we could sit back and speculate on political issues all day long, and but when you're actually putting money in the game, there's usually something to it. And I think we'll end the show on this a little bit of a speculative note, as it's kind of peek into the future and see where this might go. But I don't think, just like you can't cure the rain, you can't hold back the truth forever. And if what these doctors are saying is true, and there's some encouraging results that they can point to, and they are every day chipping away at this issue and facing incredible amount of censorship, but that strategy won't work. The genie will not go back in the bottle. If there is a genie, and it looks like there is, because here we have somebody who would put their life on the line, as Cindy mentioned, and we saw in the clip, that will never go away. We have, I think that scene on the Supreme Court, steps of the Supreme Court, very iconic event. I think we'll look back on that for years and see that as possibly the turning point. But she's not giving up, and I think there's probably a pretty cohesive group of about 100 primary care physicians at this point. The story is fanning out, and Kodak, I don't know if the speculation I was going to introduce is there was alluded to at one point in one of President Trump's speeches involving the military and the logistics of distributing something. And I don't think that something is a vaccine. I don't even know if a vaccine would be effective. And I don't think the acceptance rate would be a slam dunk either, because I think there's substantial pushback on the vaccines issue, especially if there's side effects, and especially if they really can't cure it, which there's a lot of things you can't cure. Cure is it's one of those words that really doesn't mean anything.
Well, I have to agree with you that I think there's some question about what's going to come out, Ken. I do not think it's going to be one thing. I think that that President Trump is actually, as we saw in his dealings with the governors and the guidelines on closing and reopening the states for protection and all of that, he gives choice out there to those that are that have the lawful authority, or sometimes exercise unlawful authority to make those choices available to the people. So I expect, if there is a vaccine, I do expect that that won't be mandated, and I don't think it will be the only, not cure, but the only remedy offered. I think there's going to be multiple things, and so hydroxychloroquine is front and center in the table that's being set. I don't think it'll be the only answer, but one thing we know about President Trump is he got rid of the monopoly of the pharmaceuticals to prevent people from trying new things, the Right to Try Act. And that kind of choice, I believe, is going to enter into the game before too long, and we'll see how that all plays out. But I do want to say that this is all actually part of the stage setting for the election that is going to be coming up, and perhaps it's even going to be delayed. President Trump raised that issue in the tweet, that maybe we might have to make sure that it's safe and delay it, and that's actually, I think he knew he was going to get pushback from that. He's deliberately actually triggering people that think President Trump isn't going to leave office and all of this. I believe he's probably lighting a fire under those that are going to make the deadline happen on time, so that we can have a safe and free and relatively uncorrupt election. So the pushback to his "we've got to make it safe" is actually helping the good guys, or I'll call them that the people that want to preserve American free and fair elections, to give them the impetus to enter in there and make it happen. Remains to be seen exactly how that all plays out, but I do believe that perhaps President Trump's tweet, I think he's a master of reverse psychology. He's put himself in the position of that the Democrats are going to put a plastic bag over their head and not breathe if he tells them that air is good stuff. So it's really amazing psychology that we have happening here, and a big part of that is what happens prior to the elections.
Ken, we've all talked a little bit, mentioned the what happened with social media regarding the group of doctors. I know you were online that night. I think it might be beneficial to talk about some of the specifics of what you saw. And some of the things that happened over the next day was that Donald Trump Jr. was suspended for sharing about the doctors, and there's just, the uproar on Twitter was historic. Would you want to talk a little bit about that evening when you first noticed the video by the doctors and some of the things that happened on Twitter as you watched it unfold in live time?
Sure. The typical way these things were going is you'd see somebody censored on one of the platforms, and then you just kind of work around it. You could usually, if they censored a Fox video, you could look and find a clip from somebody that just happened to have their cell phone on the television, and the quality would vary, and I'm sure the rights issue would be stretched a little bit. But to answer directly, this was very different because you could see the collusion was very evident between, this was happening on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter all at the same time. And it didn't sink in right away. I thought maybe it was a glitch in my computer, and I actually did reboot at one point. I couldn't get anything to work. I was just trying to post a video of Dr. Immanuel, and they just kept getting pulled down almost immediately. And so it was a very frustrating experience, and it did take a while to sink in. I think, I really didn't believe it was happening until the next day, until I saw the news, or Zero Hedge. if you call that news. I mean, it is. I mean, in alternative media, we've got a pretty wide array of stories. I think Zero Hedge normally prints things first and verifies later, but in this case, it was different. Everybody was seeing the same thing, and it was an incredibly unifying event. And I think this is the problem that the opposition, if we want to call them that, will find is that our people are a lot more persistent than their people, and I think they've gotten kind of used to that as telling the MSNBC viewers exactly what they want to hear, and leaving it at that. But as you can see from Dr. Stella's performance, she's not going away, and she can back up what she's saying. Jack Spirko, same thing, not a political, not even really a supporter of Donald Trump, but the country is filled with people like that I don't think the left really, the thought crafters really know that what they're up against, and they're making a lot of mistakes. And I just, last comment is, I think one of the deeper underlying themes that we'll face in the big pharma dealings is that their paradigm is based on the treatment template, basically, where you get a disease, what they call a disease or a condition, and then here comes the pill to treat it or to cure it, or whatever word they want to use, but they're waiting for the problem to emerge, versus the prevention paradigm, which is a little more common in holistic health and some of the other areas where you position your life or your diet or what have you to avoid coming in contact with these problems. And I think we're still going to have some problems, getting that paradigm through, because one of the issues with the hydroxychloroquine, zinc, and vitamin D, also I'm hearing, is that it's preventative, and nothing. I don't think anything would strike fear into the hearts of the big pharma thought crafters is if people were prevented from having these illnesses. And I know it sounds harsh on them, but I think when they're dealing with large mass population issues, they can't think empathically. It's, again, we go back to Dunbar's number, and that their entire health paradigm is based on a just macro scale that has absolutely no heart in it, because people become conceptual entities. And I'm sure that the nurses that were feeding the dying patients hydroxychloroquine in massive doses, they were just reading their orders, and they weren't really, maybe they didn't know the facts. They didn't see the Jack Spirko video. They didn't, there's the number on the paper, 4 pills, whatever. And that's how this big scale system works. And I think it's the debate, the larger picture behind us is what is the paradigm of health that is best for the country.
Ken, one thing I noticed is President Trump's ability to play people, in the sense that he lets his enemies destroy themselves. And a lot of that has to do with President Trump's ability to read people, to know people. And by that I mean his audience, or the American people, who's ever watching on TV. He has an almost innate sense of what captures the public interest. And so if he has somebody that is trying to capture that public interest, but he knows, I think, that they won't be able to, or that they have some malice aforethought involved, he'll give them the stage and let them run with it. And then that goes to the core of what you were just saying about empathy, because President Trump, I believe, really does connect with the American people, whereas some of the people, like Dr. Fauci, think that they connect, and they have some of the ingredients that they believe enable them to connect, but in the final analysis, they fall far short. And a perfect example that just happened recently was when President Trump said, "I'm too busy to throw out the first pitch at the Major League Baseball game. And you know what? Let's let Dr. Fauci do it." And if that wasn't a case of letting your enemy destroy themselves, I don't know what is. It was it was even worse than Obama's first pitch. It was unbelievable. And not only that, he got himself photographed in the stands without his mask on. So I think the guy's credibility is dropping rapidly.
So Don, would you, because one of our topics was the impact on the elections of what has been happening with COVID and the potential response of giving people hydroxychloroquine, would you want to hazard a guess as to whether the election will be delayed, as President Trump suggested in his recent tweet, or whether perhaps hydroxychloroquine will come into broad enough use so that people feel like they can vote safely going to the polls instead of mailing in ballots?
Well, I think there's going to be a combination of factors. Hydroxychloroquine is a key ingredient, but I do believe that President Trump was exercising some reverse psychology with that tweet, and that he wants to light a fire under all those people that can help to make the election safe and secure, including people that will emphasize the how, hey, if you're safe in the stores with a mask, why wouldn't you be safe voting? All of that. And I think there's plenty of time for one thing that fear does, the reaction of a fear-based initiative, something that's based in fear, is that it only lasts for a short period of time typically. And we've got a lot of time before the election. I think the fear is already starting to wear off, and people are going, really? You mean my kids won't be safe at school? Seriously? I don't know what's going on here. We've already got Orange County, California, suing the state of California so that their kids can go back to school. Things like that are happening across the nation, and that's just one element. I don't think the fear is going to hold. That's my bottom line answer to you, is that there's going to be a lot of solutions, and the fear is going to be gone. And I don't think that the election is going to be delayed, but I think that the possibility of delaying it is always going to be there in order to make people feel like they're not being panicked. I think that's an important ingredient. That's what President Trump is ultimately doing, is he's saying, we want to do whatever makes people safe, and we're not going to panic you into an election before you're ready. So he's setting the American people at ease, and I do think that's what he does best.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Poli-Psych Podcast. We hope that you have enjoyed this episode, and if you have, we ask that you please click like, subscribe to us on YouTube, subscribe to us on BitChute, follow us on Twitter, and if you have a moment, please visit our website. Once again, thanks for joining us, and until next time, wear your mask. Just kidding. Take care.